Rex's ears flattened against his skull 3 seconds before Rodney Giles grabbed Strick's arm, which meant Commander William Brown had 3 seconds to decide if staying invisible was worth watching her get hurt. Before you go any further, hit that subscribe button. I need you to stay until the end of this story. Drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far the truth travels. Now, let's dive in. Rod's fingers dug into Strick's forearm hard enough to leave marks. She didn't scream. That's what got me. She just went still, her face draining of color as his other hand moved toward her throat. The lunch crowd at La Cocina del Mar didn't gasp. They didn't move. They just looked away. I'd been sitting in that corner booth for 40 minutes, nursing coffee that had gone cold half an hour ago. I didn't mind. Cold coffee was nothing compared to the things I'd consumed in places I still couldn't talk about. At 52, with a medical retirement that came 3 weeks too late, and a canine partner the Navy said was my responsibility now, I'd gotten used to being invisible. The restaurant smelled like fried pescado and cilantro, the kind of place where the owner, Luisa Martinez, knew your order before you sat down. Afternoon sunlight cut through the front windows, hitting the worn vinyl booths and making the whole place feel like a memory that hadn't finished happening yet. Strick, her daughter, 23 and juggling college with keeping her mother's dream alive, moved between tables with the kind of grace that came from years of practice. I'd chosen that corner booth deliberately, back to the wall, clear sightlines to both exits. Old habits, the kind that don't retire when you do. Rex lay beneath the table, his tan and black coat catching the light, his custom elevated dog bed giving his joints the support the VA said he'd need for the rest of his life. At 8 years old, he wasn't the same dog who'd pulled me out of that compound in Kandahar, but his instincts, those hadn't aged a day. When the door slammed open, I noticed. When Rod's boots, expensive Italian leather, the kind bought with other people's fear, crossed the threshold, my hand stopped halfway to my cup. When his voice cut through the comfortable noise like a blade through silk, every head in the restaurant turned. Except mine. I knew better than to look too interested. But Rex went absolutely rigid. That's when I knew this wasn't going to end with conversation, because in 5 years of combat deployments and 3 years of retirement, I'd learned one thing about that dog. He didn't react to voices. He reacted to intent. And Rodney Giles had just walked in with intent that stank of violence. You need to understand something about men like Rod. They don't ask twice. And you need to understand something about me. I'd promised Luis's late husband I'd keep his family safe, but I'd also promised myself I'd never let anyone know what I was. 3 seconds. That's all I had to choose which promise to break.
The bell above the entrance never got the chance to chime. Rodney Giles kicked the door so hard it slammed against the interior wall, sending the little brass bell skittering across terracotta tile. Conversations died mid-sentence. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Even the kitchen went quiet. No more sizzle of oil, no clatter of pans, just the hum of the ancient ceiling fan pushing hot air in lazy circles. I watched him scan the room like a predator selecting prey. He found Strick near the register, her back to him as she rang up Mr. Alvarez's check. She'd pulled her dark hair into a ponytail that morning, the kind of practical choice you make when you're balancing calculus homework with double shifts. Her apron, white, hand-embroidered with the restaurant's name by her grandmother, had a small grease stain near the pocket. She hadn't noticed it yet. Luisa Martinez, Rod's voice carved through the silence. Not loud, didn't need to be. We had an appointment. Strick turned slowly. Her smile, the one she'd been wearing for Mr. Alvarez, evaporated. My mother's not here today. Her tone stayed level, professional, the kind of calm that comes from practice, not confidence. I can take a message. I don't do messages, sweetheart. He moved toward her with deliberate steps, each one calculated to make everyone in the room aware of the space he consumed. 6'2" of gym-built muscle wrapped in a leather jacket that cost more than Luisa's monthly mortgage payment. Gold rings on 3 fingers, cologne that smelled like money and menace. Beneath my table, Rex shifted his weight,
Not standing, not yet, but his muscles had gone taut, his breathing shallow. I felt it through the leash wrapped loosely around my wrist, the way the nylon went from slack to trembling. "Mr. Giles, if you'd like to schedule—" "Schedule," he laughed, sharp and humorless. "Your mother's 3 weeks late. You don't schedule with me when you're late. You pay or you learn what happens when you don't." The temperature in the room seemed to drop despite the San Diego heat pressing against the windows. Mrs. Chen set down her fork with shaking hands. The construction workers at table 6 suddenly found their fish tacos fascinating. Mr. Alvarez took a step back from the register, then another. No one was going to help. Strick's fingers curled around the edge of the counter, knuckles going white. "We can work something out. My mom always pays. You know she does. She just needs—" "I know what she needs." Rod closed the distance between them in 2 strides. "She needs to remember that interest accumulates. She needs to understand that my generosity has limits." His hand shot out and clamped around Strick's forearm. Not a grab, a statement. Her intake of breath was sharp enough to carry across the room. She didn't pull away, some instinct telling her that resistance would make it worse. But her eyes widened, pupils dilating with a fear she was trying desperately to hide behind a professional mask that was cracking at the edges. "Let go," her voice barely qualified as a whisper. "When I'm ready." My coffee cup was still warm against my palm. I could feel condensation forming on the ceramic and could smell the bitter edge of overbrewed Colombian blend that Luisa always made too strong. The sunlight streaming through the window behind me painted long shadows across the checkered floor, turning the whole scene into something theatrical, almost unreal. 3 seconds. You've got 3 seconds to decide. Rex's growl started so low I felt it more than heard it, a vibration that traveled up the leash and into my bones. His lips hadn't peeled back yet, his teeth weren't showing, but every line of his body had gone from alert to ready, his training overriding 8 years of age and arthritis that flared up in the morning cold. Rod's fingers tightened. Strick's face was drained of color. And I sat there like a statue, my hands visible on the table, my expression neutral, every muscle in my body screaming at me to move while my brain calculated angles, exit routes, collateral damage, and the 100 ways this could go wrong if anyone in this room discovered what I was, what I used to be. The moment stretched like pulled taffy, seconds becoming elastic and unbearable. Would someone call the police? Would Rod escalate? Would Strick break? Or would she hold on to that fragile dignity she was clinging to like a life raft in a storm? But underneath all those questions sat one that made my chest tighten. How long could I watch someone hurt while protecting my own invisibility? And what did it say about me that I was still calculating the cost? There's a specific kind of stillness they teach you in the teams. Not the absence of motion, the presence of absolute control. I'd mastered it in Fallujah during a 72-hour surveillance op, where scratching your nose could get your entire squad killed. Perfected it in Kandahar when Taliban fighters passed within 6 feet of my position, and the only thing keeping me alive was the ability to make my heartbeat quiet enough that it wouldn't shake the dust on my rifle barrel. That stillness was keeping me in this booth while Strick's eyes pleaded with a room full of people who'd suddenly discovered their plates were fascinating. "You know what I love about family businesses?" Rod's voice dripped with false charm. "Everyone pitches in. Daughter covers for mama. Very sweet. Very exploitable." The medical discharge papers were still in my truck. DD Form 141, Section 24, Narrative Reason for Separation, Medical Retirement. 3 words that erased 22 years of service. Shrapnel fragments embedded too close to my spine to remove without risking paralysis. Not enough to stop me, just enough to make the Navy decide I was a liability. The settlement came with conditions: counseling, monthly check-ins with a VA psychiatrist who kept asking if I had violent ideations, a very clear, very legal understanding that any altercation, justified or not, would void my benefits and put me under federal investigation. Stay invisible, Brown, you promised. Eduardo had made me promise something else entirely. 2 years ago, when the cancer was stealing him piece by piece and Louisa was drowning in bills she'd never learned to manage alone, he'd gripped my hand with fingers that had gone skeletal and whispered, "Watch over them, please. They won't ask for help, but they'll need it." I'd promised, of course I'd promised. I just hadn't expected keeping both promises would require choosing between them. Rod shifted his stance, pulling Strick closer. She stumbled, catching herself against the counter. A water glass tipped, spilling across the register. No one moved to help her clean it. Beneath the table, Rex did something I'd only seen twice before. He rose to his feet, slowly, silently, and positioned himself between my legs and the threat. Not aggressive, no hackles raised, no warning snarl, just there. A barrier made of muscle and trained instinct, his body language communicating what I couldn't. This is the line. My left knee started to ache, the old injury that flared when rain was coming or when I'd been sitting too long. I'd ignored worse. I'd functioned on a shattered femur for 3 clicks until extraction. Pain was just information, but the ache in my chest, that was different. Here's what's going to happen. Rod's tone shifted, businessman to enforcer. You're going to call Mama. Tell her she's got until Friday to bring me $8,000, not the 4 she owes. 8. Interest in making me come down here. Inconvenience fee. That's not what? He leaned in, invading her space with practiced intimidation. Fair? You think I care about fairness? Do you think any of these people care? He released her arm just long enough to gesture at the frozen diners. Look around, sweetheart. See anyone jumping up to defend you? That's because they're smart. They understand how the world actually works. The old woman at table 3, Mrs. Rodriguez, who'd been coming here since Eduardo first opened the doors, stared at her lap. The college kids by the window suddenly needed to check their phones. Mr. Alvarez had already slipped out the side exit, the little bell on that door tinkling apologetically. Cowards, every one of them. Including you, Brown. The scar tissue in my back pulled when I breathed. Nerve damage sent phantom sparks down my left leg. 3 prescription bottles in my truck's glove compartment. Pain management, muscle relaxers, anti-inflammatories. None of them were strong enough to touch what I was feeling now. I'd broken a man's collarbone in Ramadi for putting hands on a civilian woman, dislocated another shoulder in Mosul for half the aggression Rod was showing now. The difference was context. There I had authority, backup, and legal coverage. Here I had a medical discharge and everything to lose. Rod's fingers found Strick's wrist again, this time leaving visible red marks when he squeezed. Tell Mama 8,000, Friday, or I come back with friends who don't ask as nicely as I do. How much silence can you stomach before it starts eating you from the inside? The question I'd been avoiding since the psychiatrist first asked it now demanded an answer. Because sitting here, maintaining this carefully constructed invisibility, while watching someone I'd sworn to protect get brutalized, that wasn't neutrality. It was complicated. Rex's breathing had changed, each exhale measured and deliberate. His tail hung low, not tucked but ready. The leash connecting us felt less like a tether and more like a question mark. What are we doing, boss? What's the call? I'd made thousands of tactical decisions under pressure, calculated acceptable losses, chosen the mission over the moment. But those choices came with ranks and rules of engagement, and the weight of orders I could hide behind when sleep wouldn't come. This choice was mine alone. Stand up, and I risked everything the Navy had left me: my pension, my freedom, my carefully rebuilt anonymity. Stay seated, and I risked something that no discharge papers could take away: the ability to look at myself in a mirror without flinching. The mathematics of morality were never my strong suit. I was better with angles, distances, threat assessments, clean problems with clear solutions. But as Rod leaned even closer to Strick, his breath making her turn her face away in disgust, I realized something that made my hands tighten into fists beneath the table. Some problems don't have clean solutions. They just have consequences you choose to live with. Quick question while Commander Brown decides if he's staying invisible or not. Are you still invisible to YouTube's algorithm? Because we're at 720 subscribers trying to hit 1,000, and I'm starting to think Rod has more friends than we do. Change that. Like this video, subscribe if you haven't already, and comment your location below so I know this story's reaching real people, not just bots. All right, back to the moment Rex stops waiting for permission.
The sound that came from Rex wasn't a bark. It was something older, primal, a frequency that bypassed reason and spoke directly to the reptilian part of your brain that remembered when humans weren't apex predators. Rod froze mid-sentence, his arrogance flickering like a candle in the wind. Strick's wrist was still caught in his grip, her circulation cut off enough that her fingertips had started to mottle purple-white. She'd stopped trying to pull away, stopped trying to reason with him. Her jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping beneath her skin, tears building in her eyes that she refused to let fall. That's when something in her finally broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a small, sharp intake of air, the sound of someone realizing that politeness and patience weren't going to save them, that sometimes the world just takes and takes until you've got nothing left to negotiate with. Rod heard it too. I watched his expression shift, sensing victory. He yanked her closer. Rex moved. Not the explosive aggression of an attack dog, not the frantic energy of a pet protecting its owner. This was something different, deliberate, measured, utterly certain. He emerged from beneath the table like smoke taking shape, 85 pounds of controlled lethality positioning himself directly between Rod and me. His growl dropped an octave, deepened into something that vibrated the air. Every person in La Cocina del Mar heard it. Mrs. Rodriguez gasped. One of the college kids actually shoved back from their table, chair legs screeching across the tile. Even the kitchen went silent. Whoever was back there had finally noticed something was catastrophically wrong. Rod's eyes snapped to Rex. What the? I'd let her go. My voice came out flat, quiet. 22 years of command presence compressed into 6 words. I didn't stand, didn't raise my volume, didn't reach for anything that could be construed as a weapon, just sat there with my hands visible on the table, my posture relaxed, while Rex communicated everything my restraint couldn't. Is this mutt supposed to scare me? Rod tried for dismissiveness, but his hand had loosened fractionally on Strick's wrist. Instinct overriding ego. Good. Smart animals recognize predators even when they're sitting still. He's not trying to scare you. I met his eyes, let him see exactly nothing in mine. He's giving you information. What you do with it is your choice. Rex's ears were pinned back, his focus absolute. No teeth showing yet, no lunging or snapping, just that low, continuous rumble that said, I am capable, I am ready, test me if you're curious. For 3 heartbeats, nobody moved. Rod's cologne, that expensive, aggressive scent, suddenly smelled like overcompensation. His leather jacket, his gold rings, his carefully cultivated image of untouchable authority, all of it dissolved in the face of an 85-pound animal who'd decided someone needed protecting. He released Strick's wrist. She stumbled backward, cradling her arm against her chest, red marks already blooming into bruises that would last a week. Her breathing came in shallow gulps, adrenaline catching up with her now that the immediate threat had backed off. You know who I am?
Rod addressed me directly now, his attention finally registering the man who'd been invisible for 40 minutes. Can't say I do. Rodney Giles. I own half the commercial property on this street. I finance businesses when banks won't touch them. I provide a service. Services usually don't leave bruises. His smile returned, but it had changed. Sharper now. Calculating. You must be your friend, Eduardo's buddy from the service. Luisa mentioned you. Said you were helping out around here. I didn't confirm or deny, just watched him with the same neutral expression I'd given Taliban scouts trying to determine if a building was occupied. Here's the thing about friends, Rod continued, brushing imaginary dust off his jacket. They come and go, but business? Business is permanent. This girl's mother owes me money. That doesn't change because someone brought their pet to lunch. Rex's growl intensified. Easy, boy. I kept my tone conversational, but my hand had already found the leash, ready to restrain if necessary. We're just talking. 8,000, Friday. Rod directed this at Strick, who was still pressed against the counter, trembling. Tell Mama I expect her to deliver it personally. No more hiding behind daughters and family friends. He walked toward the entrance with the kind of exaggerated casualness that screamed wounded pride. But at the threshold he paused, turned back. Nice dog. His smile was all teeth and promise. Hope nothing happens to him. The door closed behind him, not slammed this time, pulled shut with deliberate gentleness that somehow felt more menacing than his entrance. The restaurant remained frozen for another 5 seconds before sound returned in a rush, chairs scraping, whispered conversations, someone in the kitchen finally asking what the hell just happened. Mrs. Rodriguez approached Strick with a napkin and ice water. One of the college kids muttered something about calling the cops. The construction workers went back to eating like nothing had occurred, probably because they knew exactly who Rod was and what retaliation looked like. I watched through the window as he climbed into a black Mercedes parked illegally across 2 spaces. Watched him sit there for a moment, phone pressed to his ear, his expression visible even from 30 feet away. He wasn't angry. I wasn't embarrassed. He was planning. Rex returned to his position beneath the table, settling onto his orthopedic bed with a heavy exhale. But his muscles hadn't relaxed. His ears still tracked every sound. And when he looked up at me, his amber eyes asked the question I was already asking myself. If we'd just made an enemy back off without throwing a single punch, why did it feel less like winning and more like starting a war we weren't prepared to finish? The health inspector showed up Tuesday morning. Not the regular guy, Martin, who'd been signing off on La Casina's permits for 6 years and always complimented Luisa's albonditas. This was someone new. Younger. Clipboard thick with violation forms already filled halfway before he'd stepped through the entrance. I was replacing the wobbly leg on table 8 when he arrived, Rex dozing in a patch of morning sun by the kitchen doorway. The inspector didn't introduce himself. Just started poking through the storage area, running gloved fingers along baseboards, shining a pen light into corners that hadn't seen scrutiny since Eduardo first opened the doors. You're going to find dust, Luisa said quietly, following him with a dish towel twisted between her palms. We clean every night, but this building is 60 years old. Dust isn't a health code violation, ma'am. He didn't look up from his clipboard. Rodent droppings, though? That's a different story. We don't have rodents. Then what do you call these? He pointed to the corner behind the refrigerator where something small and dark sat in the dust bunnies that had accumulated despite Strick's nightly sweeping. Luisa knelt, squinted. Those are peppercorns from when the jar broke last month. I'll need to document them as potential contamination. His pen moved across the form. Also, your grease trap is due for inspection. When was the last time that was serviced? She told him. He wrote something that made her face lose color. The inspector left 20 minutes later with promises to follow up within the week, which we all understood meant pay Rodney Giles or this gets worse. Louisa locked the entrance behind him, even though it was 10:30 on a Tuesday and they should have been prepping for lunch service. Her hands shook as she turned the deadbolt. "Mama!" Strick appeared from the kitchen, flour dusting her forearms from morning prep work. "What did he—" "Nothing." Louisa's voice came out too bright, too brittle. "Just routine. We'll handle it." But she didn't move away from the entrance, just stood there with her forehead pressed against the glass, shoulders rising and following with breaths that sounded like she was trying not to drown. I set down my tools. "How long has Rod been financing you?" The question hung in the air, unanswered, while Strick looked between us with growing comprehension. "Mama?" Her tone shifted from confused to accusatory. "You told me we refinanced through the credit union." "We tried. They denied us. Eduardo's medical bills, the property tax increase, the new refrigeration unit we had to install for code compliance, it all happened at once. Rod was the only one who'd work with us." "At what interest rate?" She didn't answer, didn't need to. Strick's floury hands clenched into fists. "How much do we actually owe him?" "The original loan was $4,000, 3 years ago." Mathematics isn't complicated when the numbers are designed to trap you. 4,000 at predatory rates, compounded monthly with fees for late payments and penalties for requesting extensions. I'd seen the same playbook in every port city that the Navy stationed me. Different names, same operation. And now? 12,000, as of this morning. Luisa's voice barely qualified as a whisper.
"He called while you were in class. Said the 8,000 by Friday was just goodwill, to show we're serious about settling up." Strick went pale. "We can't possibly." "I know. Then what are we supposed to?" "I don't know, mija. I've been trying to figure it out for 3 years. I've sold everything Eduardo left that had value. I've cut every expense. I work 16 hours a day and we're still drowning because the hole just keeps getting deeper." She sank into the nearest booth, suddenly small in a way that made my chest ache. This was the woman who'd hosted Sunday dinners for Eduardo's entire platoon, who'd organized fundraisers for fallen soldiers' families, who'd kept this restaurant alive through recessions and pandemic restrictions and her husband's 2-year battle with cancer. Now she looked defeated. Strick slid into the booth across from her. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you're 23. You should be worrying about midterms and internships, not whether some—" She caught herself, glanced at me, then continued quieter. "Not whether we're going to lose everything Papa built." Outside, a city maintenance truck pulled up. 2 workers climbed out, positioned an orange cone in front of the restaurant's only handicap parking space, and started erecting a "no parking, permit required" sign. I watched them work with mechanical efficiency, following orders they probably didn't question. By tomorrow, Luisa's most accessible parking lot would be gone. By next week, maybe the loading zone. Small inconveniences that would compound into customers choosing easier options down the street. Rod understood something most bullies never figured out. You don't need fists when you control the infrastructure. Rex lifted his head from his paws, ears swiveling toward the alley behind the building. A low whine built in his throat. Not aggressive, but alert. Warning. I moved to the back window, peered through the security bars Eduardo had installed after the break-in attempt in 2019. The alley was empty except for the dumpster and recycling bins. No movement, no obvious threat. But Rex's instincts had been honed in places where seeing nothing was the most dangerous thing you could report. "What is it?" Strick had followed me, still dusting with flour, her bruised wrist now wrapped in an elastic bandage. "Probably nothing." "You don't believe that." I didn't. Because men like Rodney Giles didn't make threats and then forget about them when someone's dog growled in their direction. They escalated.
They sent messages. They demonstrated that challenging their authority came with consequences more creative than direct confrontation. The health inspector was just the opening move. I'd been in enough combat zones to recognize the pattern, probe defenses, identify vulnerabilities, isolate the target from support systems, make them understand that resistance is exhausting, that surrender is easier, that nobody's coming to help because everyone else is too scared or too smart to get involved.
Strick was studying my expression with an uncomfortable perception. You're thinking this gets worse before it gets better. I'm thinking your mother needs to file a police report about yesterday. And tell them what? Louisa hadn't moved from her booth. That a businessman came to collect on a legitimate debt? That his tone was threatening? You think the San Diego PD prioritizes property disputes when they're dealing with actual crimes? She wasn't wrong. I'd made enough police reports in my career to know which ones generated action and which ones generated paperwork that disappeared into filing systems designed to discourage follow-up. Then what? Strick's frustration bled through every syllable. We just wait for him to destroy us piece by piece? Hope he gets bored before we lose everything? The question echoed the one I'd been asking myself since yesterday. How do you fight someone whose weapons are perfectly legal, who never throws a punch but still leaves you bleeding, who understands that the system protects men with resources and connections, not women running family restaurants, on margins too thin to survive sustained attack? Rex's whine intensified. He'd moved to the back entrance now, his nose pressed against the gap beneath the steel door, his entire body radiating tension. I pulled my phone from my pocket, opened the security camera app I'd installed last week, another small favor for Louisa that suddenly felt inadequate. The alley feed showed nothing unusual, but the timestamp in the corner was frozen at 10:47. It was currently 11:03. Someone had cut the feed. Not disabled it, that would have triggered an alert. They'd looped the last few minutes of footage so the screen showed an empty alley while something else was happening in real time. That required technical sophistication, planning, resources. Get away from the windows. My tone must have communicated urgency because both women moved immediately, Strick pulling her mother toward the kitchen. I grabbed Rex's tactical vest, the one with reinforced panels that could stop a knife, maybe slow a bullet, and started fastening it while he vibrated with restrained energy beneath my hands. What's happening? Louisa's voice climbed an octave. Before I could answer, the alley camera feed snapped back to life and showed 3 men in dark clothing approaching the back entrance, one of them carrying something that glinted metal in the late morning sun. Not weapons, tools. They weren't coming to hurt anyone. They were coming to make sure tomorrow's surprise building inspection would find exactly what it needed to justify shutting La Cocina del Mar down permanently. And the message was clear. This was just the beginning of showing Luisa Martinez what happened when you let friends with dogs think they could protect you from men who owned the ground beneath your feet.
I called the police from the kitchen while Louisa and Strick huddled near the walk-in freezer, but we all knew how that conversation would end before the dispatcher finished my report number. We'll send a unit when one becomes available, sir. In the meantime, stay inside and don't engage. Don't engage. Standard protocol for civilians who didn't understand that sometimes engagement finds you whether you're ready or not. The men in the alley worked for 11 minutes. I timed it, heard the scrape of metal on brick, the muffled voices coordinating movement, the deliberate sounds of sabotage disguised as vandalism. When they left, the security feed showed fresh graffiti across the back wall and something jammed into the grease trap that would guarantee tomorrow's random inspection would find catastrophic code violations. Rod's Mercedes was gone by the time the police cruiser rolled past 2 hours later without stopping. Thursday came and went. No health inspector, no citations, just the weight of waiting for the next move in a game where we didn't know the rules but understood the stakes. Friday arrived with the kind of heat that makes San Diego feel like it's holding its breath. I'd spent the morning installing additional security cameras, my own money, my own time, because sitting still had stopped feeling like discipline and started feeling like cowardice. Rex shadowed me through each installation, his arthritis making him move slower than usual, but his vigilance never wavering. At 1:47 p.m., Rodney Giles walked through the front entrance. Not alone this time. 2 men flanked him, not the alley crew, but polished versions. Expensive suits, visible earpieces, the kind of muscle that came with corporate security licenses and plausible deniability. The lunch rush had thinned to a half-dozen tables. Mrs. Rodriguez, a young family with 2 kids coloring on plate mats. The construction workers who'd witnessed Tuesday's confrontation came back anyway, which either meant loyalty or obliviousness. Rod approached the counter where Strick was organizing receipts. She saw him coming. Her entire body went rigid, but she didn't retreat, didn't call for her mother, just straightened her spine and waited. "Friday," Rod announced, loud enough to reach every corner of the restaurant. "I believe we had an appointment." "We don't have your money." Her voice didn't shake. Impressive. "I can see that." He made a show of looking around, at the faded paint, the mismatched chairs, the framed photos of Eduardo that Luisa refused to take down. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" "We're working on it." "Working on it?" His laugh cut through her response. "You've been working on it for 3 years. At some point, working on it becomes choosing not to pay, and choices have consequences." One of his security guys stepped forward, pulled a document from inside his jacket. Legal papers, probably, or a lien, something official enough to make resistance feel futile. That's when Luisa emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron, her expression carrying the kind of exhaustion that comes from fighting battles you know you're going to lose. "Mr. Giles," she positioned herself between him and Strick. "I called your office this morning, left a message proposing a payment plan." "I don't have payment plans, not anymore." He leaned against the counter, casual as a regular customer. "See, I gave you flexibility, I gave you time, and what did you do? You brought in some washed-up veteran and his attack dog to threaten me in my own business transaction." "Nobody threatened you," Luisa said quietly. "Didn't they?" He gestured toward my corner booth, where I'd been sitting for the past hour, visible but silent. "Your friend over there, the one who thinks a service dog vest gives him authority. He made it very clear that my presence wasn't welcome." Every eye in the restaurant turned toward me. I didn't move, didn't speak, just met Rod's gaze with the same neutral expression that got me through hostage negotiations and tribal council meetings in places where showing emotion meant showing weakness. But Rex, positioned at my feet, lifted his head, ears forward, watching. "Here's what's going to happen." Rod's tone shifted to something rehearsed, performed for the witnesses he'd deliberately chosen to have present. "You're going to close this restaurant today, sign over the property to settle your debt, or," he paused, smiled, "or I make a phone call and by Monday morning this building fails every inspection the city can schedule. Health, fire, structural, occupancy. You'll drown in violations before you can afford the appeals." "That's extortion," Strick breathed. "That's business." He pulled out his phone, made a show of scrolling through contacts. "Your choice. Sign now and walk away clean, or fight this and lose everything anyway, but broke and humiliated."
Luisa's hands were shaking. I could see her mentally calculating, trying to find an exit that didn't exist. Eduardo's legacy, her daughter's future. 26 years of marriage compressed into a building she was about to lose. The young mother at table 3 was already recording on her phone, but tentatively, like she wasn't sure if she should get involved. That's the thing about bullies who operate in daylight. They count on good people being too intimidated to act, too uncertain to intervene, too worried about becoming targets themselves. Rod's finger hovered over his screen. "Last chance, Louisa." I stood up. Not dramatically, not aggressively, just stood. Rex rose with me, moving to my left side, his training positioning him exactly where he needed to be. "Sit down, old man." Rod didn't even look at me. "This doesn't concern you." "Actually," I said, my voice carrying across the restaurant with parade-browned clarity, "it does." Now he looked. So did everyone else. I walked toward the counter. Slow, measured steps that gave nobody reason to panic, but communicated absolute certainty. Rex matched my pace, his gait slightly stiff from age, but his presence undeniable. "You need to leave," I told Rod. "Or what?" He spread his arms, playing to his audience. "You'll sick your dog on me again? In front of all these witnesses? I'll have animal control here in 10 minutes and that mutt will be put down by dinner." "No." I stopped 3 feet away. Close enough to matter, far enough to avoid provocation. "You'll leave because everyone in this restaurant is now recording you, because that young mother at table 3 just sent the video to her neighborhood group chat, because Mrs. Rodriguez has already texted her son, who happens to work for Channel 8 News, and because," I let the pause stretch, "you just made a very specific, very illegal extortion threat in front of a dozen witnesses, and even corrupt systems have limits when evidence goes viral." Rod's confidence flickered. The construction worker at table 6 had his phone up now, recording from a different angle. The college kids near the window were streaming to Instagram, their view count already climbing past 200. "You're bluffing," he said, but his voice had lost its certainty. "I'm really not." I kept my tone conversational, almost friendly. "You made a mistake. You assumed these people were afraid enough to stay silent, but fear has a funny breaking point, and you just found theirs." His security guys shifted uncomfortably, their earpieces probably buzzing with someone telling them this had gone sideways. Rod's face flushed red. "You have no idea who you're—" "Commander William Brown, U.S. Navy SEALs, retired, 22 years of service, specialist in high-value target extraction and threat neutralization, which is a fancy way of saying I'm very good at identifying predators who rely on fear instead of legitimacy." The restaurant had gone absolutely silent except for the ceiling fan's rhythmic rotation. Rod opened his mouth. I closed it, looked at his security team, who were very deliberately not making eye contact. "This isn't over," he finally managed. "Yes," I said, "it is." He left, not slowly, not with dignity, but with the jerky movements of someone whose carefully constructed authority had collapsed in real time and was documented from 6 different angles. His Mercedes peeled out of the parking lot fast enough to leave rubber on asphalt. Nobody applauded, nobody cheered. The phones kept recording for another 30 seconds before slowly lowering. Mrs. Rodriguez was crying quietly, her hands pressed to her mouth. The young mother gathered her children and left without finishing her meal, but pressed a 20 into Strick's hand on the way out. The construction workers went back to their food like nothing had happened, which was probably the highest compliment they knew how to give. Louisa stood frozen behind the counter, her expression cycling through shock, relief, and something that might have been grief. Strick looked at me with eyes that were seeing me clearly for the first time. "You were really?" "Yeah." "And you've just been sitting here? For weeks?" "Yeah." She started laughing, then crying, then both at once, her shoulders shaking with the kind of release that comes when you've been holding your breath for so long you forgot what oxygen felt like. I guided her to the nearest booth, let her work through it while her mother brought water and Rex pressed his head against her knee, offering the kind of comfort that doesn't require words. 20 minutes later, when the shaking had stopped and the tears had dried, Strick asked the question I'd been avoiding since Eduardo's funeral. "Why didn't you tell us?" "Because I promised your father I'd watch over you. Not fix everything, not take over. Just be here if things got bad enough that you needed someone who understood what real bad looked like." "And now?" "Now everyone with a phone knows what I am." I looked at Rex, who had settled beside the booth, content and calm. "Which means I can't stay invisible anymore. Can't pretend I'm just some guy who likes fish tacos." Luisa finally spoke, her voice thick. "Eduardo always said you were the one person he'd trust to do the hard thing when everyone else looked away." I gave him too much credit. "No," she held her head. "He knew you'd wait until the exact right moment, when standing up would mean something instead of just feeding your ego." Through the window, I could see cars slowing down, people who'd seen the videos already circulating, who were checking to make sure the restaurant was okay, who were demonstrating with their presence that Rod's isolation tactics had backfired. The parking lot started filling up, not with inspectors or thugs, but with customers who'd gotten text messages and social media alerts and decided that showing up was its own kind of resistance. By 3 p.m., La Cocina del Mar had a line out the door. Rex and I sat in our corner booth watching Luisa and Strick move through the controlled chaos of an unexpected rush, their movements synchronized by years of working side by side. They'd be okay. Not immediately, not without struggle, but okay. As for me, I'd stopped being invisible the moment I stood up, stopped pretending that walking away was the same as staying neutral, stopped hiding behind medical discharges and promises I'd made to myself when I should have been honoring the promise I'd made to Eduardo.
Rex's tail thumped once against the vinyl booth. Outside, Rod's black Mercedes drove past slowly, once, then again, before finally disappearing around the corner. Some battles don't end with surrender documents. They end with the quiet understanding that power built on fear collapses the moment people stop being afraid. But as I watched that car fade from view, I couldn't shake the feeling that men like Rodney Giles don't disappear just because they've been embarrassed. They adapt. They wait. They find new ways to hurt people who've made them look weak. And the question that kept me awake that night, long after the restaurant had closed and Luisa had locked up and Rex had taken his arthritis medication, was simple. What happens when going viral isn't enough, and the man you've humiliated decides that revenge is worth more than money? So Rod learned what happens when you mess with a Navy SEAL's promise. Now here's your mission. We're still climbing to 1,000 subscribers, and unlike Rod, I'm asking nicely. If this story hits differently, if you felt something, subscribe, like, share it with someone who needs to remember that courage doesn't always announce itself. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far the truth travels. Because some battles aren't won with fists. They're won with people who refuse to stay silent. See you in the next one.